Welcome to episode 8 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. We're going from the beginning and looking at what made Canada's premier superhero team work, what didn't work, and taking a romp through a lesser-read but much-loved corner of the 616.
We continue our march through the first 12 issues of Alpha Flight's solo series today with some housekeeping. This first year of Alpha by John Byrne is disjointed, but not necessarily in a bad way. Every issue is structured as a now story in 1984 and a B story of the origin of one of our original 6, our 06. Since Alpha Flight came together as a private team in issue number 1 and met the Master of the World in issues number 2 and 3, we have seen solo adventures with flying speedster twins Northstar and Aurora, aka Jean-Paul and Jean-Marie Beaubier, Snowbird, aka Anne McKenzie, and Puck, aka Eugene Judd.
And the origins of Alpha Flight's leader, the techno-suit-powered Guardian, aka James McDonald Hudson, aka JMH, and Starcy Medicine Chief Shaman, aka Dr. Michael Two Youngman, MD, as well as that of the twins.
Today we will cover a Sasquatch solo adventure, the origin of Snowbird and Sasquatch, and a few interludes laying the groundwork for the action in issues 11 and 12. This is the last episode where we slice and dice things, so after this episode, this idiosyncratic issue structure gets set aside for a more traditional full issue story. So we're enjoying the closeout here.
Every issue we talk about today has the same credits, so away we go.
Alpha Flight number 9 and 10, cover date April and May 1984, written and drawn by John Byrne, colored by Andy Yankus, lettered by Michael Higgins, edited by Denny O'Neil and Jim Shooter.
The cover for number 9 is exactly on par with this arc. It's fine. I mean, it's nothing special. It's Sasquatch is there holding a possibly dead dude with an ominous view that looks like he's going to fight the thing.
Again.
However, the cover for number 10 is really good. It is just a close-up on Sasquatch's face. He looks feral. Like, this is the most dangerous Sasquatch has ever looked. His eyes are just reflecting flames. It's a lot of orange and red, but it just works incredibly well of kind of suggesting something a bit menacing about Sasquatch that we really haven't seen up to this point.
Yeah, there's a depth of savagery that's hinted at here, of rage, the classic Gamma monster rage stuff that's going on behind everything that we haven't really gotten from Sasquatch, that it's always been Walt in control, and he talks like Walt even though he's Sasquatch, and, is always there. Okay. Alpha Flight member Dr. Walter Langkowski, a.k.a. the orange-furred brute Sasquatch, is at the Mount Logan Cosmic Ray Research Station. Mount Logan, for those of you who are not nerds, is in the Yukon Territory of Canada, just across the border from the southeastern corner of Alaska.
It's great how Byrne just constantly puts Alpha Flight in specifically Canadian locations. Yeah, just really kind of, again, showing off the scale of the country and also, like, in some ways suggesting that maybe Alpha Flight isn't quite big enough to deal with that much territory, but
Well, what I like is that they are making it such casual references to these places, as in, of course you know where Calgary is, of course you know what the Stampede is, of course you know what Mount Logan is, and it's just kind of, showing kids that there's more to the world than the New York City,
Although, oddly enough, we will very shortly see a certain JMH in New York City, so there is that.
Oh, it hurts to see the flag flying over New York, man. This will also go away. These specifically Canadian locations will also go away once our creative teams shift in a few years, and there are no longer Canadians involved in making Alpha Flight. And in fact, that will be called out specifically in a letters column by Canadian readers saying, "We miss the Canadian flavor to this. I can't tell you why it's off, but I can tell that there's no Canadians involved in this book anymore."
So is this your way of avoiding burning your one reference to He Who Shall Not Be Named?
I think I danced that exquisitely, thank you very much. And I still have my one fist shake to the sky while cursing his name in my pocket. I will make good use of it later.
Excellent. Our friend, secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langkowski has been brought in to help a quartet of scientists decipher a mysterious energy pattern they detected. And yeah, okay, that it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, this arc, this 2-issue story is kind of a nothing burger, man. Like it's just
It's the
sort of
first dud. Yeah.
it's just sort of there. Like all of the characters are placeholder. The action is sort of like okay. It's just a very random. It's very random, and I guess the one beat it does kind of develop is this idea of Sasquatch being potentially feral. That it can just be the Sasquatch in control and not Walt. But 2 issues just to get that across seems, yeah.
There's twists and turns, but the mystery is stale and uninteresting. The villain is bafflingly random. The stakes are low, and we are reminded once again that John Byrne would rather be focused on the Fantastic Four than doing this book.
Yeah, this almost feels like a way of filling in some information from the FF through Alpha Flight. But that assumes that the FF readers are also reading Alpha Flight. I don't know. It's baffling.
And Alpha Flight already exists to fill in some background on the X-Men, so why are they being used in this background here? Yeah, so the TLDR for these issues, and isn't that what this podcast is all about? The scientists beam down the Super Skrull from space. Super Skrull kills them all. Sasquatch fights him in the snow for an issue before beaming Super Skrull back into space. So, take a drink or 4 if you're a completionist, but don't come complaining to me tomorrow, folks, because we are just getting started.
In issue number 10, technically, Super Skrull hypnotizes Sasquatch into helping him rebuild the teleporting machinery, so that kind of counts as a team-up, yeah?
Yeah. Take a drink. You regretting toasting those 4 scientists like 20 seconds ago, listeners? Huh? By the way, the Super Skrull, his name is Kl'rt. KL''RT. I only looked it up because I needed to know if he had a last name, because I did know his first name.
Which should come as no surprise to anyone who's made it to episode 8 of this podcast.
Yeah, the last thing on the Super Skrull before I set him aside, just a reminder, the Super Skrull has the powers of the original Fantastic Four. So he can turn invisible, he can control flame and fly, he has the whole the things, edit out that blip.
Absolutely not.
He has the things, invulnerability and rocky skin, and he can stretch like Reed Richards. So my question is, how was Sasquatch able to fight him for like 2 issues when Sasquatch covered in hair is intensely flammable?
Yeah, there's even that scene where Sasquatch, where Walt turns into Sasquatch and ambushes the Super Skrull by like coming out of the snow and grabbing his legs and throwing him, and
he extinguishes the flame there, and like it was on purpose to extinguish the flame. Just why didn't the Super Skrull blast him with flame? The guy's covered in hair. He's a Sasquatch kebab.
Why weren't his hands smoking? I mean, like why wasn't the first thing that he did after he threw the scroll would bury his hands into the snow while making some like noises?
Yeah, so that's what happens across these 2 issues. Walt comes home to his empty condo in Vancouver, and we learn that he has been divorced for 5 years. She left and took his son. And doing, shuffling things around here, that seems like it might line up with when he became Sasquatch, or possibly when he signed up with Department H. Either way, I read that very much as Walt was making decisions that were contrary to having a family, and so the family up and left him. But it's never mentioned again as far as the son.
That kind of makes sense, right? Like, we've talked a lot about his devil may care attitude, his sort of being into the superheroism thing for kicks. So it kind of would track that he would, once he started to go down this path, that perhaps the family life was not exactly something he was worried about, or something that he could even hope to maintain. It takes work, people. Don't forget that. It takes so much work.
Oh, yeah. Parenting's so hard. Let me try it with a hangover.
Why do I do this to myself?
But yeah, we literally never hear about his son again, and that is marvel.fandom.com official. I went and checked. No, they are like literally never another reference to that son. So the ex-wife will come back in about 45 issues or so to steal Walt's previously unmentioned fortune, just because Walt was currently dead, or Wanda Langkowski. I actually have a lot to look forward to talking about with Wanda. I'm making a joke here, but that's both more and so much less to the character than what I'm hinting at here. And I think that there is a great story about the son seeking out Walt and trying to understand why his father was never there. And there's a powerful image of Walt not being a man who talks about fifis, Sasquatching out and making the grown son feel just like a little kid again.
Essentially Ang Lee's Hulk, but Orange. Very, very orange.
As is his custom when coming home since the divorce, Walt calls out an ironic, "Honey, I'm home," and is surprised to find Aurora answers him, having broken into his condo after angrily breaking up with her brother in issue number 8.
That sentence makes her sound like the most dramatic theater kid you've ever met, and yeah, you nailed it in one. You're right. That is Aurora.
A reminder that for all we have seen, the last time Walt saw Aurora was when they were leaving the Master's ruined base in issue number 3, just after discovering her Jean-Marie persona.
This makes finding her in his condo uninvited a lot less comforting than the narration about coming home to an empty house makes it seem. He absolutely has to be wondering what in the hell he's gotten himself into.
Well, it says on the page that he wonders what the rest of Alpha Flight will think of this. I'm wondering what Walt thinks of this.
Yeah.
They actually won't break up until Walt no longer has a dick. And fun fact, listeners, that time won't be the last time Walt doesn't have a dick, because that isn't even when he's Wanda.
Why do you phrase things the way you do?
Look, these all happen under Mantlo, so there's nothing we can do about that.
You said the secret word.
Ah! All right. I got to do it upright. Here, I'm shaking my fist to the sky. Mantlo!
And blessedly, that wraps up our solo Sasquatch story and brings us to Snowbird's origins, spanning Alpha Flight number 7 and 8, cover dated February and March of 1984.
Our story takes place circa 1968. Our scene is an archaeological dig north of the Arctic Circle, where grad student Richard Easton is excited to find a metal headband that neither he nor his supervisors can quite identify.
Later that night, Easton is drawn to the headband in its storage tent and puts it on his head. And, well, that's the last we'll see of studious grad student Richard Easton. The headband reveals to him a vision of 3 old, indigenous-presenting figures identified as Nelvana, goddess of the Northern Lights, and her father Hodiak, the third is not named at this time, looming large over him and asking him for a boon.
A boon. That's such a great word.
I'm going to need to ask for that more often. I would like a boon.
Realizing that Richard Easton isn't picking up what they're throwing down, Nelvana changes from her aged, ragged form into a lithe, young, blonde woman and asks Easton to help her save the world from the returning great beasts by engaging in one night of pleasure with her to, as she says, "Give me your seed, your love, give me your power."
I mean, I think you should actually, I'll ask for boons moving forward, and you need to ask people for their seed, their love, and their power. Deal?
I would like to renegotiate the terms of this deal, Tom. You got to be a god to pull off that particular ask.
If someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
Well, yeah, so Easton, now looking at this lithe, young, blonde woman, signs the fuck up being a lonely grad student, only to awaken the next day to find no evidence of the archaeological dig and that 10 years have passed since he disappeared and was presumed dead. So he had a 10-year orgasm with a god.
Easton babbles about Hodiak and Nelvana and flees the lands of men and into the realms of madness, which astute listeners will recognize even without the art that makes it clear that Richard Easton is the scraggly, bespectacled man who summoned Tundra in issue number 1, our episode number 4.
So Snowbird had to call all her friends in the whole wide world together to help kill her dad and didn't even know it.
It's pretty intense. That's metal as hell. I don't
like how they kill Tundra and then play across his corpse. Yeah,
absolutely. It's and when Tundra was first forming, her initial instinct was to take out the vessel that was giving him access. So if he'd been a little bit more alive, she would have just straight killed her dad. But by then, he'd already been all used up by Tundra manifesting. Yeah, it's a lot.
So a year goes by, and mystical energies draw Michael Two Youngman, now dressed as shaman of the Sakri, a misspelling of Sarsi, repeated a few times in the early issues, medicine chief uniform, which I guess is his Alpha Flight uniform, just so coincidentally.
The Great Spirit, an undefined presence that seems to be the biggest god above all in the Northlands, we have seen Snowbird and Shaman reference it before, has called Shaman here to speak with a very pregnant Nelvana. This is a year after Easton reappeared, so this is the longest pregnancy in the history of anything. It's 11 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when a pregnancy starts. You know what? I don't want to get into when life begins for a god, Tom.
I really wish that was a trap, but it just sort of I saw the direction you were going with it as well. I'm like, oh God, oh, this is bad. This is
It's like
not
when
what
you're
I want
trying
to
to
do.
ride your bike across a really narrow thing and you just don't veer off, don't veer off. Whoop! Yeah, there you
Yep.
go.
Yep.
So, as a goddess, Nelvana is not well practiced in reproducing, much less doing so with mortal flesh, and she needs help. As an accomplished medical doctor and shaman, Michael is the best person on Earth to provide that help.
Take that, Strange.
Well, Doctor Strange is actually observing this like astrally, and we get a nice little seal of approval at the end from Doctor Strange saying he's going to be a great chief. Was it at the end of this one, or was the end of the shaman origin?
That was after his origin.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I knew that Strange was checking in, but yeah, I would love to see some more Doctor Strange and Michael interact, because I think that Michael's going to come off the better for those two.
I would agree. The infant that emerges from the birth is unformed and able to take any shape at will. In order to allow it to possess a human form, Michael binds the godling to the land. It takes on that human form, and Michael is suddenly holding a blonde child that appears 1 year old.
Well, okay, so 1 year old is drawn by John Byrne, and we know how John Byrne draws children.
Yes. Much discussed.
Cut to a few years later, and Heather and her now husband, James, visit her old friend and neighbor, Michael Two Youngman, in Banff National Park. Now, we had some engaged discussion here as to what that a few years later means, and we figured out that we're in 1979, 1980. So this has got to be before X-Men number 109, when Weapon Alpha goes to try to take Wolverine back, but after 1978, when Easton came back. So that's what we got.
It took entirely too long for us to figure this out. It was a lot. I do think I would love to be a fly on the wall for the phone call for Heather calling up her former neighbor to say, oh, hey, can we come visit you, me and my husband? And at this point, okay, I guess you're married. I guess you're old enough to be married. How old is he? Excuse me? Like, he's my age, you're saying?
Well, yeah, and this is apparently strictly a social call. We're given no hint as to how Heather found Michael or why she wanted to see him, other than narrative convenience.
Yeah. I mean, we've discussed how convenience works in the Marvel universe. So this was always going to happen.
So, upon arriving, the Hudsons are introduced to Michael's companion, a young woman named Narya, who appears to be about 20. She's strikingly pale, blonde, and with strange black eyes with white pupils.
I think it's kind of assumed that they're together, which is weird in its own way.
That seems to be what James and Heather are thinking, and are trying to be polite about Michael's midlife crisis trophy wife.
James can't say shit to that. Like, I don't know where Mac would get off talking about an age disparity. Well,
he never talks about anything, so we'll give him that much credit.
This is true.
That evening, James and Heather remark on how strange Narya's appearance is, specifically her eyes. Heather sneaks out after James falls asleep post-coitus. Take a drink. And she sees Narya running through the woods naked and shapeshifting into an owl that then swoops on, kills, and eats a rodent.
Ew.
I guess that watching your husband fly around in a fancy battle suit is one thing, but like seeing other superpowers, I guess that would be like the next time that Heather has seen a superpower. So she's not like experienced in this stuff, but yeah, that would throw me for a loop too.
The next morning they ask Michael about what they saw, and he tells them they're crazy. No, I'm just kidding. He explains Narya's origins. Yeah. Instead, he said, "Oh, actually, I dosed you last night over dinner, so you were just tripping balls." Like, that's all that was.
That is not Michael fucking Two Youngman's way, Tom.
Not his way at all. He explains Narya's origins, and that while tied to the land, such that she has a human form, she's also able to take on the form of any of the beasts of the north. This also, of course, outs Michael's own abilities as shaman. James recruits them both into Alpha Flight.
And then, for reasons that all occur off-panel, Narya adopts an even more human form without the weird eyes and is given a human secret identity where she works as a member of the RCMP as Anne McKenzie.
I mean, I wonder if there was some larger grand plan to all that or something, or they started with that as part of the idea and then slowly just sort of shed it as it wasn't narratively
Yeah,
necessary.
they realized how restrictive it was it's like putting your character not just in handcuffs, but foot binders and all sorts of impediments to being able to move.
Yeah, like full Iron Maiden on the narrative possibilities for your character. Anyway, I'm going to assume it's something like that because it just doesn't make any sense otherwise.
All right. Quick breather, Tom. Let's take a break. We've been setting them up and knocking them down here. We got Sasquatch's solo out of the way. We've got Snowbird's origin, and now we get Sasquatch's origin from issue number 11, where we find out that Walter Langkowski had gone to college with Bruce Banner and was a friend of his for a semester. Once Bruce was revealed as the Hulk, quote, 3 years ago, Walt began collecting everything he could about the Hulk with what he knew about Bruce as a young man and tried to follow in his footsteps.
They were also, while in school together, talking about gamma radiation. So it's kind of, they're already establishing that Walt isn't just trying to figure out how Bruce did it. He's actually building off of research that he's already familiar with. I will also say that there's a line in here, somewhere along the way, Banner's idealism must have been sidetracked. He found himself working on a top secret military project and paid a terrible price for the world's first and only gamma bomb. Okay, well, you're being really shady for a dude you knew for a semester, apparently, and who you're now going to try and use what you know about gamma and what he did to do it to yourself. So, like, I don't know. There's a little judgy coming from Mr. Sasquatch there.
You know, I hate to say it, especially because we're just coming off this Sasquatch story that was a nothing burger, but this Sasquatch origin story kind of feels like a nothing burger too. Like, it's just a lot of narration of what he's thinking moving up to when he, hits the button and then gets Sasquatched out. He says he spent $1 million of his own dollars before approaching the government to help in furthering his research on how to recreate the Hulk. So this is the first mention of the millions Walt made as a football player.
In a time when football players weren't making millions.
Well, this would have been, in the heydays of the Packers in the late 60s, early 70s. And they said that he played for the Packers. So I don't know, maybe. And he was a smart guy. He invested well.
Probably bought a bunch of car dealerships.
He probably bought part of the Green Bay Packers. This is apparently also how he got hooked up with Department H before he could become Sasquatch, that he was coming in just like Bruce Banner as a government researcher trying to, make weaponized soldiers.
So, but it was Bruce that had his ideals lost along the way. Oh, and by the way, how's the family doing there, Walt?
Yeah. So his wife left him in 1979, based on what he told us last issue, and JMH forms Department H in 1973. So is Walt's pursuit of the Gamma monster the reason his marriage fell apart?
Yes.
There's some wiggle room here, too. It might have been the reason that he got his doctorate in biochemistry in the first place, because maybe he just did his undergrad, went off and did all of his football stuff, found out about Bruce, and then,
It's kind of fascinating to me that Sasquatch was such the focus before they had a solo series. Like, he was the one doing all the appearances. There's all this stuff about Sasquatch. And yet when we're getting this solo couple issues and this close up of his origins, he's like the least interesting of all of the characters.
It's exactly the same stuff we've been presented with before. And there's really nothing new here. There's just a bit more detail laid over on what we already knew. There are some surprisingly fertile grounds here for some good motivation stories about our friend, secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langkowski. So maybe we can get like an Alpha Flight Forever book. Tom, do you know the X Factor Forever and New Mutants Forever books?
No, I don't know these at all.
It's where Louise Simonson and Louise Simonson, both of those, I believe, went back to X Factor, the original one with the original X-Men, and New Mutants from before those books got handed off to other people, and continued on her story from 1987-ish as what she had wanted to do with X Factor. So it's just like this own little pocket world where we just gave Louise back control of the story, but it backtracks in time. Anyway, it would be neat to see somebody fill in all this detail on Walter in a cool way.
Yeah, and not a Mantlo way.
Yeah.
Walt goes out to the middle of nowhere to perform a gamma experiment on himself to recreate the Hulk. He transforms and goes wild, stalking through the frozen nothing, just like a force of destruction heading in a straight line.
This is not the Sasquatch that we know with Walt being in control and being able to control himself.
To be fair, I might prefer the wild Sasquatch because then I don't have to hear that goddamn voice.
Love you, bruv.
love you too. Eventually, Snowbird finds him in the snow, having transformed back into Walt, and now having some pretty unpleasant frostbite in some pretty private places, I would have to say.
Yeah, you remember how I mentioned this wasn't the first time that Walt didn't have a dick? Yeah, that's a joke. As far as I know, he did not frostbite it off.
Oh my god. Anyways.
So everyone is surprised that Sasquatch is orange instead of green, which seems reasonable because gamma creatures tend to be green. So I don't know the background of this detail, whether artist John Byrne just liked the orange look better than the green, or if this is an intentional plot hook put in by writer John Byrne. But it'll eventually be answered in the story. For now, just enjoy the glory days of Walt and Sasquatch.
JMH comes to him in the hospital and says he'll need Sasquatch's help after he botched bringing Wolverine back. This is after X-Men number 109, but before JMH has reported to the Prime Minister. So I guess in X-Men 109, when he said he'd bring Alpha Flight with him, he meant Shaman and Snowbird, which is a really strong trio, but like seems like a stretch to call them a super team. And also numbers-wise, you know you're not matching up with the X-Men at that point.
During He Who Shall Not Be Named's stretch, Alpha Flight consists of Heather as Vindicator and Madison Jeffries in the box armor and Sasquatch in Wanda Langkowski's body. And those three are the only members of Alpha Flight for like a long time, like 30 issues, 35 issues. And they're just a trio. Heather is just always in a throuple, I guess. And now our last bit of housekeeping. Interspersed in the last 5 issues we've covered have been some of what they call unconnected interludes. And no, really, that's what they're labeled on the page. Unconnected interlude.
Our first came in issue number 6. We mentioned that Guardian flew home for a refreshing glass of iced tea, Jimmy, and found a letter to him from the Roxxon Corporation. Then in issue 7, we meet a slim, dour, bitter-faced man in the Southbrook Mall in Winnipeg, Manitoba, because of course it's the Southbrook Mall in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Yeah, I go there every other weekend. They've got great sales.
Playing 9 games of chess simultaneously and winning them all, as he gets his usual lunch of 1 plain hot dog and black coffee, which is sociopathic.
It's just there to make sure that you understand this guy is not okay and takes no joy in life. None.
Anyway, as he's about to chow down on that amazing lunch, a voice calls out, Alec Thorne, or should I say, Smart Alec of Gamma Flight. The speaker is Delphine Courtney, and her employer is offering Alec an opportunity.
Hey, some Gamma Flight. Nice to pick up on that little bit from issue number 1. If you recall, we had 3 panels on page 3 of issue number 1, because I'm sure listeners, you're tracking this as closely as we are, that we had Alpha Flight, we had Beta Flight, and we had Gamma Flight. Beta Flight had Puck and Marina, and 2 other figures that have not been named yet. Gamma Flight had 4 figures who are in matched uniforms, and you can't even really tell their faces. So this Smart Alec person doesn't have like a cool uniform. Everything we know about him is that he was on Gamma Flight. He's apparently really smart, and he doesn't have a super costume at this time.
Or maybe he's wearing it right now. I mean, if his food choices are anything to judge by.
Well, he has to get his kicks somewhere. He just doesn't spend it on food. If Watchmen has taught us anything, it's that it's always better with the costume on.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I did not.
That was the story of Watchmen.
No, it's true. It's just I forgot that reference apparently because that just... Anyway.
Tom learned something about himself today, listeners. Glad you were here for it.
Every episode. So issue 10 then opens up with JMH apartment shopping in Brooklyn. The Guardian is leaving the Canada.
Say it isn't so! Jimmy Ladd has taken an executive scientist position with Roxxon Oil in New York and signed a lease on an apartment.
Because the last time he worked for an oil company, it went swimmingly.
Hey, look, it's what he knows how to do. He knows how to do what the boss tells him. Whether the boss is the oil company or the prime minister, he is a company man.
Interestingly, that is the same building that Captain America appears to live in because New York City is somehow the smallest city in the world.
Yeah, for such a big country, even Alpha Flight has a very small and interconnected set of people. Like, Michael was Heather's neighbor, and Heather's married to James, and we're going to get Michael's daughter involved as Talisman later on, which I have opinions about Talisman.
We wouldn't expect anything less.
And even the twins are twins, I mean, like, yeah, there's not many people. It's kind of like the Star Wars feel, where there's like, this whole galaxy of trillions of people, but we keep hearing about the Skywalker family.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just want to note that the twins are twins has, in no other context could that statement not be read as like pure madness on your part, like stating such a fact. But no, it makes sense here.
Now, I am going to do one more completionist thing that's not in the script here, Tom. But if you are reading the physical omnibus of Alpha Flight, there is a little interlude here from the Fantastic Four where Walt makes an appearance because the Invisible Girl's pregnancy has gone awry. And so Reed Richards has summoned the greatest minds in the world to help out, which includes Walter Langkowski, Canadian gamma researcher, Bruce Banner, our own leading expert on the effects of radiation, even Michael Morbius, perhaps the world's greatest expert on blood radiology. The only thing that Walt does in this thing is tell them that they need to go get his old professor, Dr. Otto Octavius, to help out. After he says that, he appears on page a few more times, but never opens his mouth again. So Walt is only there for Byrne to be able to plug his guy into the FF. So at least it goes both ways. Not only do we get the FF guest stars coming over into Alpha Flight, we at least got Alpha Flight plugged in there. You're rolling your eyes, Tom.
His professor was Dr. Octopus?
It is the smallest world in the world, Tom.
That's wild. Okay. Actually, that's kind of neat, which also makes his origin story and his solo adventure so much more annoying that they were so bland. Like, give me some of his background. I don't know. I want to see the wet works he did in Prague. Something.
And that brings us to the end of this one. This is a rather short episode, folks, because we're dealing with this throwaway Sasquatch story, little bit of house cleaning. What we're really doing is getting ready for the upcoming arc in issues number 11 and 12, which if you are here, you know exactly what we're talking about. So if you haven't yet, we recommend finishing up episodes 1 through 8 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom before episode 9 and what is probably the most well-known Alpha Flight story, And One Shall Surely Die.
And if you've been listening from the beginning, thanks so much for coming along on this ride of non-traditional issues with us. It makes what's coming all the better.
That takes us to this week's Alpha Flight patch. Excelsior Embroidery Company is producing a series of custom patches for Why Not based on what we're covering, and this week we see the Marina face patch. Visit the whynotpod.com blog to see it and find links to all things Why Not around the web. Leave a comment on the blog. We'd love to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions. And check out excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com for all your embroidered comic nerd needs like patches, towels, battle vests, anything soft enough to hoop.
And just to interject here, folks, Chris does fantastic work on these patches, but the Marina one, kind of haunting. I mean... You've seen her on the page. Imagine just a close-up of her face right there.
She's got dead eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes, Tom.
And guess what? He managed to make that happen in patch form. So here we go.
This episode of Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis, with cat noises provided by a chonk named Teeny. It's produced by Tom Flynn with help from Chris Baker. New episodes available every other week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast provider. Those are really important in helping fellow fans find our show.
Until next time.
Dun, 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 dun,
I hear that song all the time now.
I think it really adds an element of fun and character to our show.
No, it definitely sets the tone right from the start. This is going to be something
goofiness from the late 90s.
Yep.
Because not many people are going to pick anarcho-Christian ska as their theme song.
No.